It's the fourth Sunday of Advent. We're back here reading through scriptures, learning what God is speaking to us through the word, and enjoying Summit as we look at our Advent candles. And this is the week that if you've not done a good job with your Advent wreath of cycling through your candles yearly, you've got like one really stubby candle and it's always the week one, and your fourth Sunday of Advent candle is still tall and proud, and you realize, man, next year I probably should light the tallest one for the first week of Advent, but you won't, and I won't, and we're just gonna have that stubby week one Advent candle and this fourth week of Advent candle, and they're just gonna be that way until the end of history, and that's just the way it is and how it goes in Advent. This week's readings are about trust, and I don't know where you fall on the spectrum of trust, but trust is difficult because trust requires a little bit of vulnerability, and I know at least for me, when I think about trust is tough. Because trust can so easily be broken, and we have experiences of that. And when trust is broken in a person, we sometimes try to find trust in other places, or when we feel we can't trust people, sometimes we try to find trust in ourselves or in a particular system or in a philosophy or a political belief. But we put trust in places that sometimes it's not the best place to put our trust. And this week in the readings, there are two people who are both in situations where they think they're doing the right thing. And they have this moment where they're sort of shaken out of that, and they have a choice to trust in God or to go along with the path that they were working through. The first one is actually one of my favorite readings from the book of Isaiah. We've been hanging out with Isaiah all through Advent, and this final reading is the Emmanuel prophecy. It's from Isaiah chapter 7. And there's this moment where Isaiah is in the throne room with King Ahaz. Now, King Ahaz, not a great king in Israel, not one of the best guys, and he is not super faithful to the Lord. In fact, Ahaz knows that there are people coming to try to conquer his kingdom. And rather than relying on God, which has been done throughout Israelite history when there have been conflicts or challenges, think back to Egypt, you think about wandering in the wilderness, and people relied on God. And God came through and proved himself to the people time and time again. But now Ahaz isn't in the wilderness, he's in a kingdom, and he's got like a military, and he's got walls, and he's got people that he wants to protect, and he's got a lot of wealth that he wants to protect, and some people are coming to try to take that, as it goes with kingdoms and this sort of thing. Ahaz, in order to protect himself, instead of relying on God, has contacted the Assyrians, which are not friends of the Israelite people traditionally, but these people are possibly an ally. So rather than relying on God to protect his chosen people, Ahaz has gone to an enemy, pagan enemy, and asked them for some help and protection. And this is not a good thing, because this is ultimately going to be part of what causes the ruin and downfall of the kingdom. So the prophet Isaiah goes into Ahaz and says, I want to ask you something. You can ask God for anything. In fact, if you pull right from it, the Lord spoke to Ahaz through Isaiah and said, "Ask for a sign from the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as the netherworld or as high as the sky." God has just looked at Ahaz and said, you can ask for anything you want. Give me any sign, no matter how big, no matter how small, deep, tall, you ask for it, and I'm going to give you that sign. Now, this is where Ahaz could say, tell me what to do with this army that's about to march against us. Tell me how I can be saved. Tell me how I'm going to get out of this. Ahaz could ask that from God, but the challenge is he knows that God is going to call him to fidelity. God is going to call him to trust in the Lord. And so then Ahaz offers this seemingly pious response back to the prophet. He said, I will not ask. I will not tempt the Lord. How many times have you felt that way? I know I have, well, I don't want to ask for a certain thing in prayer because isn't that sort of tempting God? Does God really care? If I ask for something for myself, isn't that kind of selfish with so much suffering in the world? And it's almost a false piety. It is a false piety because we're saying, I don't want to bring that concern to God. And sometimes it's because we feel meek about it or we feel sort of timid, but sometimes it's because we actually don't want to know God's answer. We don't want to bring that situation, that relationship to God, that struggle to God, because we don't necessarily want to know what God's going to say, because a part of us knows what God is going to say. And so we're like, well, I'm not going to tempt the Lord. I'm not going to bother God with my petition, my plea, my prayer. And Isaiah's not buying it. He looks at Ahaz and he said, "Listen, O house of David, is it not enough for you to weary people? Must you also weary my God?" And this is where Isaiah levels this prophecy. There is going to be a sign. A virgin's going to conceive of a son, and you will name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And there's this like little nudge at Ahaz that like, listen, Ahaz, like God is not abandon this people because you've abandoned God. God is with us. God is still present here despite your poor leadership and despite your infidelity. God has not left. But this is also a bigger prophecy that one day God is going to give us this sign that is as deep as the netherworld, that is as high as the heavens. God is going to give us God's only son. God will literally be with us. So there's this immediate moment, Ahaz, God is still with us. And despite anything that happens and all that will happen, God is not going to abandon our people. And there's this also bigger thing that maybe even at the moment Isaiah didn't understand as he was speaking God's word, but God will literally be with us soon, one day, and that God is faithful even when we are not. Now you got this second situation of trust in the gospel with Joseph. In the Gospel of Matthew, we get the infancy narrative that contains Joseph in it, and Mary isn't as big of a figure in that story, but we get this vision that Joseph has. Now Joseph is a righteous man. It says that in the gospel. He does things that are right, and he finds out that Mary has conceived a child and they're not married. This is not good for a couple of reasons. One, it sort of looks bad on Joseph. Two, conceiving a child out of marriage is adultery, and that is a violation of one of the 10 commandments. And so Joseph knows that this could have like some real severe consequences for Mary, not just public shame, but potentially legal consequences. And Joseph also knows that this perhaps is not a great marriage to enter into, but he loves Mary. He wants to take care of Mary. That hasn't changed, and Joseph, as a righteous man, is going to just end this marriage quietly. He's not going to make a big deal out of it. He's just going to let it be what it is. So hopefully Mary escapes the big public shame, the big ousting, and any other consequences that maybe people would try to level with her. And he says this is the right thing to do. And if it were any other situation, this level of care at that time in history would have been the right thing to do, to protect the dignity of the person, to avoid public shame, and to avoid some of the very harsh consequences that would have been leveled. But instead, God comes to Joseph and says, don't divorce Mary. She is bringing God with us. She's going to conceive a son. You're going to name him Jesus. He is Emmanuel. And Joseph has this dream where now God says, don't worry about it. Take Mary into your home, marry her, don't be afraid. This is all part of the plan. Joseph, when he wakes up, could have just said, what a wild dream. I need to really avoid eating that couscous before I go to bed because it's clearly messing with my brain. Instead, Joseph says, all right, I've heard the voice of God. He's spoken to me. I'm going to do what God has asked. And Joseph does take Mary into his home and becomes the father on earth to Jesus, raising him as a strong carpenter and as a man of virtue, just as Joseph was. Two people who both choose to hear God's voice. One trusts it and one does not. Ahaz refuses to listen, and Joseph changes course even when he thought what he was doing was right. Ahaz thought he was doing what was right by contracting the Assyrians to be their bodyguards, but wasn't willing to change course. Who will you be on this last Sunday of Advent, where the theme in these readings is all about trust in God, whose sometimes ways don't make a ton of sense? It doesn't make sense not to have a companion army when fighting against a much bigger force, but God is with us. And for Joseph, it doesn't make sense to have this confusing situation where a virgin has conceived and she's going to bear God's son, and how does that all work? But God is with us, and when we trust in God's plan, whose ways are higher than our ways, we can always lean into that and know that God comes through. God is with you and God is with me. And next week, we're going to celebrate Christmas, where God is with us, and we remember that moment that God broke into our world. And when we go to Mass and we receive the Eucharist, God is with us in a tangible way there. Enjoy the fourth Sunday of Advent. You've got 5 Christmas shopping days or whatever, depending on when you're watching this. Get your last couple of gifts in, hang another ornament on the tree, and get ready to celebrate that great moment when God broke into our existence to prove that he is trustworthy, he is faithful, and he is true. Enjoy the rest of your week, my friends.